Very good morning. Today, in this class, we are going to discuss about RAM types, different RAMs, SDRAM, DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, and Rambus RAM. So, we are going to discuss about differentiation among these all RAMs. So, distinguished RAM types, SDRAM, DDR1 through 3, and Rambus RAM. This is our class today. So once just recollect our RAM. What is RAM? Once we see again before going to discuss about differences among SDRAM, DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, ROMless RAM. Before that, once we see what is meant by RAM. So random access memory, RAM, is a type of data storage used in computers that is generally located on the motherboard. This type of memory is volatile and all information that was stored in the RAM and lost when the computer is turned off. So information will be lost when computer is turned off in the RAM. So it is a temporary storage area generally stored on motherboard and located on the motherboard. Sorry, it is RAM is located on the motherboard. So generally we store the information which is temporarily being there in the RAM. So the RAM is generally in the form of semiconductor devices. It is nothing but chip, and this RAM chip may be individually mounted on the motherboard or in sets of several chips on a small board connected to the motherboard. This small board is called a memory stick or memory module. Nowadays, all the RAM is coming in the form of small board or memory sticks. The older memory types were in the form of chips called dual in-line package, DIP switches. Although DIP chips are still used today, the majority of memory is in the form of module. A narrow printed circuit board attached to a connector on the motherboard is called memory module now. So this is also called memory sticks. Generally, we are using these memory sticks at present situation. So there are three main circuit boards types containing chips containing RAM. Single inline memory modules, SIMs, dual inline memory modules, DIMMs, and Rambus inline memory modules, those are called RIMs. So most of the motherboards today use DIMMs only, dual inline memory modules. Before these DIMMs, SIMs were used. Before SIMs, there was DIP switch packages in the form of microchips, in the form of semiconductor chips, which were directly mounted, directly soldered on the motherboard itself, and that memory was fixed on the motherboard. So there was no chance of enhancing the RAM in those days. So whereas now all motherboards are offering memory slots, RAM slots to insert any capacity of RAM. Almost, of course, in the manual of motherboard, it tells how much RAM can be expanded in that RAM by using those available RAM slots. So we are inserting the RAM sticks or RAM modules in the memory slots for getting the RAM or primary memory inside the computer. So there are two main types of RAMs here: the dynamic random access memory or DRAM or dynamic RAM. And another one is static random access memory, SRAM. The RAM is most personal computers. The RAM in the most personal computer is dynamic RAM. The dynamic RAM is being used in almost personal computers. All dynamic RAM chips on DIMMs, SIMs, or RIMs have to refresh every few milliseconds by rewriting the data on the module. So all the RAMs, dynamic RAMs required a refreshment of power because generally they use capacitors inside them to store the data. So capacitors by nature, they require the refreshing of electricity for every few milliseconds. We have to refresh the DRAMs every time. So all the DRAMs are available in the form of DIMMs, dual inline package, dual inline memory module package, SIMs, single inline memory module package, or RIMs, Rambus inline memory module packages. So static random access memories generally are used as cache memory inside the computer. Generally, this sits between CPU and motherboard, CPU and RAM, and some of the static memory are coming inside the CPU itself, mounted inside the CPU itself, and some of the static memories are static RAMs are manufactured outside the CPU, but between the CPU and RAM. So because it is very faster than the RAM, DRAM. So static RAM is volatile memory, is often used in cache memory and registers because it is a lot faster and does not require refreshing like dynamic RAM. So static RAM does not require refreshing because the static RAM uses transistors. So transistor does not need any refreshment. Once you store the data, as long as power is on, the information will be there. Whereas DRAMs required refreshing for every few milliseconds to retain the data. SRAM retains information and is able to operate higher speeds than DRAM. Because DRAM is a lot cheaper than SRAM, it is common to see PC manufacturers use DRAM always. So almost in all personal computers we are finding DRAMs only. Static RAM is in the form of cache memory. Dynamic RAM is a memory that needs refreshing. The refreshing is done by the memory controller, which is part of the chipset and the motherboard. Static RAM does not need refreshing and is used in memory cache and the central processing unit CPU. It is called L1, L2 and L3 cache. So cache memories are coming in the form of level 1, level 2 and level 3. Original SRAM was stored on the motherboard. Later, SRAM was inside of the CPU housing are stored on both motherboard and inside of the CPU. This is the specialty of SRAM used for cache memory. So now we are going to see another RAM, SDRAM. This is the most important RAM, SDRAM. So almost all the types of DRAMs available in the DRAMs available in the form of SDRAMs only, SDRAM only. So SDRAM, which is short for synchronous DRAM, is a type of memory that synchronizes itself with the computer system clock. Most important. Generally, RAMs having their own clock, and system clock is different from RAM's clock, operating clock speed. So this synchronous DRAM operates on par with the system clock. So that is why increases the speed of the processing. Being synchronized allows the memory to run at higher speeds than the previous memory types. And asynchronous DRAM also supports up to 133 MHz system bus cycle. So here synchronous DRAM, asynchronous DRAM. Asynchronous DRAM, it won't operate on the speeds of system clock. The asynchronous DRAM has its own system clock, and CPU and system is having another CPU clock. So when processing, CPU has to wait up to the DRAM's system clock, DRAM's own clock. So that is nothing but the mismatch of the system clocks between CPU and also DRAM, because DRAM is asynchronous, thus decreasing the speed of the processing. Since 1993, this is the prevalent type of memory used in computers around the world. Up to 1993. The original type named SDRAM up to the current type DDR3 all derivatives of the SDRAM memory type only. So there are number of SDRAM derivations. Those derivations are called SDRAM, synchronous SDRAM, DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4, and also we are going to in the present generation of DDR5. The variation is DDR5, presently available in the 2020. So DDR means double data rate. So what is double data rate we see, and differences also we will see. So this is one of the example for SDRAM. This is called memory stick or memory module, which can be inserted on the motherboard slots. Previous this was DIP switch package, nothing but directory semiconductor integrated circuit. That chip was directly mounted or soldered on the motherboard itself. So there was no removing that RAM. But here we can remove at any time. If motherboard permits, we can enhance the or expands the RAM capacity by adding extra memory sticks like this, modules like this. So what is SDRAM here? SDRAM, the synchronous DRAM, is a generic name for various kinds of dynamic random access memory that are synchronized with the clock speed that the microprocessor is optimized for. So the name itself saying that is synchronous. For what it is synchronous? For which one it is synchronous? It is synchronized with the clock speed of the microprocessor. So when the microprocessor clock speed and DRAM clock speed are synchronized, the speed of the transfer of data is very fast. Data transfer rate is very fast. Whereas DRAMs are not asynchronized with the microprocessor speed. So microprocessor certainly wait for the turn of DRAM to send the data or receive the data. So there the gap between, mismatch between system clock and also DRAM's own clock asynchronization, thus decreasing the fastness of the system. And this tends to increase the number of instructions that the processor can perform in a given time. When SDRAM and microprocessor are optimized, synchronized at a particular speed, thus increase the number of instructions that processor can perform in a given time. That's the specialty of SDRAM, synchronous DRAM. The speed of SDRAM is rated in megahertz rather than in nanoseconds. This makes it easier to compare the bus speed and the RAM chip speed. We can convert the RAM clock speed into nanoseconds by dividing the chip speed into 1 billion nanoseconds, which is 1 second. Example, 83 megahertz RAM would equivalent to 12 nanoseconds. SDRAM is the name for any dynamic random access memory, DRAM, where the external interface is synchronized by external clock signal, and the name synchronous DRAM. So name itself we have given is synchronized form, synchronized with frequency, clock frequency of the microprocessor system clock. So that's why it is synchronous DRAM. So now we are going to see the most important thing, DDR versions, and what are the differences. Our topic is differences among DDR versions. What are the DDR versions? And we have to see the differences among these DDR versions. The SDRAM technology underwent a huge amount of development. As a result, several successive families of the memory were introduced, each with improved performance over the previous generations. So there are number of developments on the SDRAM technology, and those developments are DDR versions. So there are different types of versions developed so far. Since the inception of this DRAM up to till now, there are number of versions. We'll see what are these versions. So SDRAM, this is a basic type of SDRAM. This is called SDRAM. This is the basic type of SDRAM that was first introduced. It has now superseded by other types. It is referred to as a single data rate SDRAM or just SDRAM. Synchronous DRAM we know. The first version was SDR, means single data rate. Single data rate SDRAM. SDR means single data rate. SDRAM means synchronous data. Single data rate synchronized dynamics random access memory. That is the full form of SDR, SDRAM. Why we are calling single data rate? While transferring in the clock frequency, the SDR, SDRAM able to send 1 bit at a time for a clock frequency when raising it on the raising edge only, on the raising edge only. So that is called single data rate. Whereas DDR, SDRAM, this is revolutionary. the most important thing, DDR SDRAM. DDR SDRAM, also known as DDR1 SDRAM, gains its name from fact that it is double data rate SDRAM. The first one is single data rate SDRAM. After that, double data rate SDRAM. That is, double data rate SDRAM is considered as DDR1. This type of SDRAM provides data transfer at twice the speed of the traditional type of SDRAM memory. So the name itself, double. In the single data rate SDRAM, it transfers the data, single data at a time. Whereas in double data rate SDRAM, twice the speed of the traditional type of SDRAM. This is achieved by transferring data twice per cycle. In SDRAM, only single data per cycle will be transferred in the raising edge only. Whereas in DDR SDRAM, it is double data rate. So data is twice per cycle. So it transfers the data at falling edge of the clock cycle and also raising edge of the clock cycle. That's why with the help of this clock cycle, twice the data we are able to send. Next DDR versions are DDR2 SDRAM. First one, SDRAM, single data rate SDRAM. Second one, DDR1 SDRAM. And next now DDR2 SDRAM can operate the external bus twice as fast as its predecessor, and it was first introduced in the year 2003. After DDR2, DDR4 to DDR3, DDR3 SDRAM is a further development of the double data rate type of SDRAM. It provides further improvements in overall performance and speed. Main improvement is in terms of speed only. DDR4 SDRAM. DDR4 SDRAM was the next generation of DDR SDRAM. It provided enhanced performance to meet the demands of the day. It was introduced the later half of 2014. DDR4. Another one, there is the latest version expecting. DDR5 SDRAM. Development of SDRAM technology is moving forwards, and the next generation of SDRAM labeled DDR5 is currently under development. Of course, the specification was launched in the year 2016 and released on 14th July 2020. But more expectations are there for DDR5. DDR5 will reduce power consumption while doubling bandwidth and capacity. DDR5 design promises it shelves with double the density and double the speed of first gen DDR4 3200 modules. That basically means where DDR4 maxes out at 16 gigabytes per stick, whereas DDR5 will be able to accommodate 32 GB in the same space. That is the specialty. The density is more, double the speed. So in the same particular size of the disk, same particular size of the RAM, DDR4, it maxes out of 16 GB per stick, whereas in the same space, DDR5 will be able to accommodate 32 GB of space. So these are the DDR versions. Synchronous SDRAM, single data rate synchronous SDRAM. So we are not using asynchronous, of course they are used, but most of you are using synchronous SDRAM only. Synchronous RAM. So in that synchronous RAM, again, there are a number of versions. Single data rate SDRAM, double data rate SDRAM. The double data rate SDRAM, again we are seeing DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4 and present DDR5. So we see the differences among these now. So what is the difference between first SDRAM and DDR? SDRAM transfer synchronous dynamic random access memory. DDR transfer double data rate. SDRAM make use of one edge of the clock. DDR-RAM makes use of both edges of the clock to transfer the data. This SDRAM single data rate SDRAM transfer the data and one edge of the clock. Here DDR-RAM transfer the data both edges of the data, nothing but rising edge and falling edge. SDRAM sends a signal once per clock cycle. DDR transfer data twice per clock cycle. These are the main differences between synchronous SDRAM and the single data rate SDRAM and also DDR. Here we can see the pictures, difference between SDRAM and DDR. DDR SDRAM standard, single data rate RAM, synchronous, double data rate DDR1, double data rate 2 DDR2, double data rate 3 and double data rate 4. So internal clock speed of this RAM is 100 to 166 megahertz for SDRAM, single data rate SDRAM, 133 to 200 megahertz speed for DDR1, and DDR2 same speed, DDR3 also same speed, and DDR4 also same speed. Whereas bus clock cycle is completely different from this. Here bus clock cycle is same for SDRAM and also DDR1. For DDR2 bus clock frequency is 266 to 400. This is double. This clock frequency is double for this DDR2. And DDR3 again improved speed of the DDR3 bus clock cycle 533 MHz to 800 MHz. Further for DDR4 also it increased vast 166 MHz to 1600 MHz. Here we are seeing prefetching bits 1 byte, 1 number of bytes, and here 2 numbers of bytes. Here 4 number of bytes for DDR2, 8 number of bytes for each DDR3 and also DDR4. So what is the data rate? Mega transfers per second. Mega transfers per second. So 100 to 166 mega transfers per second. 266 to 400 mega transfers per second. And 533 to 800 per second for DDR2. 1066 to 1600 mega transfers per second DDR3. And 2133 to 3200 mega transfers per second for DDR4. The transfer rate of the data is nothing but 0.8 to 1.3 gigabits per second, 2.1 to 3.2 gigabytes per second, 4.2 to 6.4 per gigabytes per second, 8.5 to 14.9 for DDR3, and 17 to 21.3 gigabytes per second in term for DDR4. The voltage level is 3.3 voltage for SDRAM. It's required this power, and reducing the power here DDR 2.5 to or 2.6. Again reducing the power for DDR2, that is 1.8 voltage, and DDR3 also again we are reducing 1.35 or 1.5. So DDR4 accepts very little amount of voltage, that is nothing but 1.2 voltage. This is almost differences among all the DDRs in terms of internal clock speed, in terms of bus clock, in terms of prefetch number of bits, in terms of data rate, in terms of transfer rate of data, in terms of voltage levels. These are the main differences among the SDR and the DDR1, DDR2, DDR3 and DDR4. So now we are going to see another one, Rambus dynamic random access memory, that is nothing but RDRAM. Rambus dynamic random access memory was developed by Rambus, initially released in the year 1999. RDRAM is a memory technology that offers 1.6 gigabits per second of theoretical memory bandwidth and offers improved memory access at a slightly higher cost when compared to SDRAM. It is very faster than all the DDRAMs. It is somewhat costlier than all SDRAMs. Rambus dynamic random access memory. After Intel's contract with Rambus expired in 2001, Intel shifted its first focus primarily to DDR, SDRAM, and today RDRAM is not often found in the computers because Intel is developing all the RAMs today. Rambus founded in 1990 by Dr. Mike Palmwald and Mark Aurich. Today, Rambus develops and licenses scalable bandwidth chip connection technologies that enable semiconductor memory devices and ASICs to keep pace with faster processors and controllers. So what is meant by ASIC here? Application specific integrated chip. Application specific integrated chip. As an overall memory subsystem, RDRAM consisted of the following: random access memory, RAM, a bus or path connecting RAM to microprocessor and devices in the computer that is used it. The Rambus inline memory module RIM connected to an RDRAM motherboard using a 184-pin connector versus 168-pin connector of the dual inline memory module used by SDRAM. So RDRAM was consisting of random access memory in it, a RAM controller in it, and bus or path connecting RAM to microprocessor and devices in the computer that is used it. So these three components were in the overall RDRAM subsystem were available. In the year 1999, direct Rambus DRAM was released, which provided a 16-bit bus rather than SDRAM's initial 8-bit bus. RDRAM was the inventor of double data rate transfers, in which data is moved in both the beginning and end of the clock cycle. RDRAM also used pipelining to move from RAM to cache memory levels located closer to the microprocessor or display. RDRAM was offering pipelining technique. RDRAM versus DDR SDRAM. With the introduction of Intel Corporation chipsets in 2002, the supported double data rate SDRAM, DDR SDRAM, and RDRAM, the computing technology both reached a data transfer bandwidth rate of 4,266 megabytes per second. And RDRAM stayed competitive with the DDR SDRAM through DDR200 to DDR300. So DDR SDRAM reached to 4,266 megabytes per second. In the year 2003, Intel introduced a chipset that supported DDR400 memory, which increased the data transfer bandwidth rate to 6,000 megabits per second. The terms DDR200, DDR300, DDR400 are clock speed designations of original DDR SDRAM memory technology. That is, first one is DDR SDRAM. The speed indicators were dropped with the introduction of DDR2 and beyond. RDRAM effectively became obsolete with the launch of DDR400, since it could no longer keep up in terms of data transfer speed or low latency rates. So after introducing the DDR4 and DDR versions, almost RDRAM, Rambus inline Rambus random access RAM is almost obsolete. So DDR SDRAM then became the de facto memory standard in most computing systems by the mid 2000s. So almost RDRAM, Rambus Rambus dynamic random access memory is almost obsolete due to increasing speed of DDR SDRAMs. So here we can see the total memory inside the computer. ROM read-only memory is divided into primary memory is divided into ROM read-only memory, RAM random access memory. And ROM is divided into PROM programmable read-only memory, and EEPROM erasable programmable read-only memory, and electrically erasable programmable read-only memory. So, but whereas RAM is divided into number of types, random access memory is SRAM, static RAM used for cache memory L1, L2, L3, and dynamic RAM used for generally primary memory. This is of type again available DRAM packages like this, DRAM types and uses here. So DIMM 72 pin, 100 pin, 144 pins, 200 pins, and 204 pins. A micro DIMMs, which was pins having 172 and 214 pins, were used for laptops, SDRAM in the form of SDRAM or DDR SDRAM. 30 pin, this 30 pin SIM, fast edge mode, EDO, and this is 72 pin EDO extended data out. This is 168 DIMM and 72 pin SIM, 30 pin SIM, here 168 pin DIMM. This is SDRAM synchronous dynamic RAM. Then improvement is 184 pin DIMM, that is DDR SDRAM double data rate SDRAM. The 240 pin DIMM DDR2 SDRAM double data red S2 SDRAM. This 184 pin RIM, it is RDRAM, Rambus dynamic random access memory, Rambus dynamic RAM. The 232 pin RIM, RDRAM, Rambus dynamic RAM. So these are the types of RAMs available. Now we have seen the various memory modules these are, and the next also we elaborate these RAM types again. So this elaboration we know by this elaboration differences among all these RAMs. Thank you. So now we are going to see the different types of RAMs here. DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4. The frequencies of 400, 500, 400, 800, 1600 and 2133 of each. So different types of RAMs, DRAMs are available. And now we are going to see the different types of RAMs. So RAM is available in the personal computers, laptop computers, smartphones, and gaming modules. Everywhere we are finding the RAMs. So what is the importance of RAM? What are the types? So random access memory is of static RAM and dynamic RAM. So here we see the two types of memories in the first invention, static RAM and dynamic random access memory. Random access memory, static RAM and dynamic RAM. The two types of memories are used in the computer. So what is the difference between these two, static RAM and dynamic RAM? We see. The difference is that in terms of usage, speed, cost and density, static RAM generally used for cache memory. It is very faster than dynamic RAM, and cost is also more when you compare with the dynamic RAM, and density is low. Whereas dynamic RAM, it is used for main memory. It is also faster but somewhat slower than static RAM. It is cheaper than SDRAM, static RAM. It is density is high. So these are the differences between static RAM and dynamic RAM. So if you see the further types of DRAMs here, generally in personal computers we are using DRAMs only. SRAMs are used for cache memory. DRAMs are used for primary memory. So terminology generally used for these DRAMs are speed and bandwidth, packaging standards of the DRAM, applications of the DRAM. These are the foremost issues terminology used for the DRAMs. So this is called asynchronous DRAM. Before it was asynchronous DRAM. Here RAM is not synchronized with the CPU clock. Thus the name is asynchronous DRAM. So when it is asynchronized, the clock speed of RAM and clock speed of CPU is different. Whereas synchronous RAM, SDRAM, the clock speed of the CPU and RAM is same. So here the RAM is synchronized with this clock, system clock. So this CPU clock and synchronous DRAM's clock speed is same. So here synchronous DRAM follows the CPU clock, nothing but system clock. Whereas generally the DRAMs won't follow that CPU clock. So the important things, how this works, here we have to see some terminology. So however, the RAM and memory controller and IO bus, what are the clock frequencies here? We have two clock frequencies, input of output clock frequency and also RAM internal clock frequency. In case of RAM, when we are discussing, you must see these two types of clock frequencies, IO clock frequency and RAM internal clock frequency. The IO clock frequency generally falls between 100 and 133 MHz. And RAM internal clock frequency also falls 100 to 133 megahertz. So this is indicated on the RAM stick, RAM modules. Generally, RAM comes in the form of sticks or modules, PC 100 and PC 133. So this indicates the speed of the RAM. So if you see PC 100 means IO bus clock frequency is equivalent 100 megahertz. The speed of the IO clock frequency is 100 megahertz K for RAM. This is IO bus clock frequency. So maximum bandwidth is equivalent to 100 into 100 megahertz into 64 bits, because the RAM bus speed is bandwidth is 64 bits. 64 by 8 bits is equivalent 800 megabits per second. So here this takes the voltage of 3.3 volts. This SDRAM takes 3.3 voltage for that. So synchronous SDRAM CPU clock speed, again SDRAM. What is the single data rate SDRAM? Before that, simply we have seen synchronous DRAM. Now we are going to the next version, SDRAM, because these SDRAMs are number of versions are there. The first version is SDRAM, synchronous SDRAM, and next version is SDRAM, nothing but single data rate SDRAM, and next one is double data rate SDRAM. In that double data rate SDRAMs, DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4. Double data rate 1, double data rate 2, double data rate 3, double data rate 4. So what is the frequency for this single data rate SDRAM? So we see now single data rate SDRAM. So this sends data with the clock speed of the CPU, but rising and falling edge. It means rising edge and falling edge. So data 1 bit per 1 clock cycle. It sent 1 bit per 1 clock cycle, nothing but in the rising edge only. So in the single data rate SDRAM, the memory RAM, the RAM able to transfer the data 1 bit per 1 clock cycle, 1 clock frequency. This is nothing but the rising edge only. The RAM can transfer the data. The next thing, double data rate, DDR, SDRAM, double data rate RAM. These are categorized versions are DDR1, DDR2, DDR3 and DDR4. So these are having different clock frequencies, different bus speeds, and there is always improvement from DDR1 through DDR4. Before this DDR4, 1 through 4, DDR single data rate. Here we are seeing DDR1, double data rate 1 SDRAM. The voltage level it takes is 2.5 volts, and 2 bits are prefetched here from this RAM, and frequency of this DDR1, data transfer rate of this DDR1, we see now. So this is the clock frequency. RAM internal clock frequency is 133 megahertz and 200 megahertz. It comes in the two forms, and clock frequency of this RAM is also 133 megahertz and 200 megahertz. So if you calculate the speed of this DDR1 based on this internal clock frequency and clock frequency of the bus, we see. So transfer data rate is 266 mega transfers per second. 266 mega transfers per second and 400 mega transfers per second. Mega transfers per second. So because double data, that's why it is double the transfer rate. Bus frequency is 200 megahertz and mega transfer per second is 400. So 400 into 64 bits data bus by 8 bits is equivalent to 3200 megabits per second speed of this DDR1 RAM. So bus frequency is 200 megahertz. As it's double, 400 mega transfers per second. This is DDR400, we can say, because mega transfer per second. Data speed is nothing but measured in the form of 400 mega transfer per second into 64 by 8, that is 64-bit wide. For 8-bit wide, nothing but 3200 megabits per second is equal to nothing but indicated as PC 3200 and the DDR4. So like this we see internal clock frequency of the DDR2 is 100 megahertz, 200 megahertz, 200 megahertz and 400 megahertz clock frequency. 400 mega transfer per second, here in this case 800 mega transfer per second. This is indicated as DDR2 400, DDR2 800. The voltage level is 1.8 volts only. So this is 4-bit prefetch. It prefetches 4 bits from the RAM while transferring the data. So DDR2 we say clock frequency 200 and 400, 400 mega transfer per second, 800 mega transfer per second. It indicated in the RAM stick as PC2 3200 and PC2 6400. On the RAM stick or module, these figures are indicated by manufacturer. If you see the DDR3, this is 8 bits prefetches from RAM. Voltage level is 1.5 volts to 1.35 volts. And these are indicated as DDR3 800 and PC3 6400. The internal clock frequency is 100 MHz and 266.6 MHz. Bus clock frequency is 400 MHz and 1600.6 MHz. And data rate transfer is 800 mega transfer per second here in this case, and 2133.33 mega transfer per second in this case. And the data transfer rate is megabits per second in terms of 6400 megabits per second, here in this case 70,000 megabits per second for DDR3. So in the RAM stick it indicated as DDR3 800 and PC3 6400. So this is about DDR3. So if you see the DDR4, it takes 1.2 volts, 1.3 volts, and 8 bits prefetch is available from this DDR4 RAM. So when you see the clock frequencies, RAM internal frequencies are 200 megahertz and 400 megahertz. Clock bus clock frequency is 800 megahertz and 1600 megahertz here. And in terms of DDR4, data rate transfer 1600 mega transfer per second in this case, and 3200 mega transfer per second in this case, and this indicated as PC4 12,800 megabits per second, we can say, in this 25,600 megabits per second module. So these are indicated as DDR4 1600 and DDR4 3200. This is the indication on the DDR4 and the clock frequency, different clock frequencies, speed and voltage level of this DDR4, and prefetching number of bits are 8 bits prefetch facilities available. So here we see the RAM slots on the motherboard. These are the RAM slots. There are 4 slots available in this. In the 4 slots we are able to insert 4 memory sticks. These are called memory sticks or memory modules. So if you want, we can increase the capacity, or if motherboard is offering only 2 GB RAM, we have 2 1 GB RAM sticks or a single 2 GB RAM stick. Either we can have. So DDR4 is this. Again, so DRAM packages. What are the so far we have seen speeds, bus data transfer rates, bus speeds, clock speeds, and prefetching number of bits and voltage levels we have seen. So what are the DRAM packages? How they come? How they are available? We'll see. It is available in dual inline package, DIP switches. Before it was DIP switches. Before in older computers, this was the DIP package. It is nothing but integrated circuit. It was called dual inline packages. Now it has changed the scene. Single inline memory modules. This is single inline memory modules. The RAM is coming in the form of modules. First it was dual inline package. Now it is coming single inline memory modules. The next one is dual inline memory module. The first one dual inline package. Second one is single inline memory module, and this one is dual inline memory module. Now most of the RAM packages are coming, DRAM packages are coming in this dual inline memory modules only at present. So if you see the DDR packages, DRAM packages, DDR double data rate, first one double data rate 1, it was having 184 pins in it, two sides as pinned. This is called edge connector, and having 2.5 volts, and DDR2 taking 2.8 volts, having 280 pins in it. DDR3, it is taking 1.5 volts of data, 1.5 volts of power, and 240 pins in it. And as a DDR4, it was also taking only 1.2 volts, very less power. It was having 288 pins in it. This is a comparison of DDR1, 2, 3, and 4 in terms of voltage level and in terms of pins packages. So the DRAM is coming in the package, these packages DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, DDR4. Now we are using DDR4 in the market. DDR4 is available maximum. So DIMM, small outline DIMM, we can say these are used for small outline DIMM. These are used for mobiles and laptops. We see the small outline DIMM. This is called small DIMM, small outline DIMM, used for laptop computers and also mobile devices, some of the mobile devices, portable devices, we can say. So here DIMM, small outline DIMM, having 200 pins here. So DIMM DDR1 200 pins. So DIMM DDR2, that is a small outline DDR2 to 200 pins. So DIMM DDR3 having 204 pins in it. So these are used for laptops and small portable devices. So here we can see MDDR or LPDR, low power DDR1 and 2, 3 and 4 and X. These are used generally portable devices, especially in laptops and especially mobile devices. These are being used. As we said, the RAM is most important part, important components in all the computers, all computing devices, desktop computer, it may be desktop computer, it may be laptop computer, or it may be mobile device, any portable device, tablets are everywhere, gaming schedules, even servers or workstations also we use the RAM. So this is the lower power DDRs used in portable devices like laptops and also in mobile phones and other portable devices. So this is another one important graphics DDR, which enhances the graphics facility, famous NVIDIA. So GDDR1, DDR2, GDDR3, GDDR4 and also GDDR5. The graphics DDR double data rate RAM used for enhancing the graphics facility of a computer. It's the specialty of these DDRAMs, GDDRs, graphics DDRs. So far we have discussed about all the RAMs available now, the differences among all the RAMs. The SDRAM, single data rate RAM and double data rate RAM 1, double data rate RAM 2, 3 and 4. Differences we have seen so far. Again we see the differences. DDR is DRAM standard, DDR1, 2, 3 and 4. Year of release is 2000, DDR1 released in the year 2000, DDR2 released in the year 2003 and DDR3 released in the year 2007, DDR4 released in the year 2014. Bus clock speed in the terms of megahertz, DDR1 is offering 100 to 200 megahertz and DDR2 offering 200 to 533.33 megahertz speed, bus clock speed. and DDR3 offering 400 to 1667, 67 megahertz bus clock speed. And here DDR4 offering, which was invented in released in the year 2004, offering bus clock speed of 1066.67 to 2133.33 megahertz bus clock speed, whereas internal memory clock speed of the DDR1 is 100 to 200 megahertz, and internal memory clock speed of DDR2 is 100 to 266.67 megahertz, and DDR3 also same, offering 100 to 266.67 internal clock speed. DDR4 is 133.33 to 266.67 internal memory clock speed. And pre-fetching bits are minimum bursting, 2 number of bits in DDR1, 4 number of bits in DDR2, pre-fetching bits. DDR3 and DDR4 are 8 number of bits. The transfer rate is mega transfers per second, we can say 200 to 400 in case of DDR1, 400 to 1600.67 mega transfer per second in case of DDR2, and 800 to 2133.33 mega transfer rate in case of DDR3. For DDR4 to 133.33 to 4266.67 mega transfer rate. So voltage level, DDR1 is taking 2.5 or 2.6, DDR2 1.8, and DDR3 1.5 or 1.35, and DDR4 very less power, it was consuming 1.05 or 1.2. So these are all our DIMM pins. In case of DIMM pins, DDR1 has 184. In case of SODIMM, small outline DIMM, it was having 200 pins. For DDR2, for normal DIMM, 240 pins, and SODIMM 200 pins. For DDR3, for normal DIMM, 240 pins, for SODIMM 204 pins, and DDR4 288 pins for DIMM and 256 pins for SODIMM, nothing but small outline pins. This is the comparison and differences among all the DDR1, DDR2, DDR3. So this is all about our memories, RAM, static RAM and dynamic RAM. Static RAM is used for generally cache memory, dynamic RAM is used for main memory. The dynamic RAM is also called developed as synchronous RAM. Before it was asynchronous RAM. Asynchronous DRAM were not used generally because asynchronous dynamic RAM is not synchronized with the clock speed of the CPU. That's decreasing the speed of the system processing speed. So synchronous DRAMs are used. So synchronous DRAM is named as synchronous dynamic RAM. So synchronous dynamic RAM as also have number of versions. In them, synchronous single data rate synchronous dynamic RAM, and next double data rate is synchronous dynamic RAM. So generally we are using double data rate synchronous dynamic RAM because these are very fast. So synchronous double data rate dynamic RAMs are having different versions: DDR1, DDR2, DDR3, and DDR4. So far we have seen differences among these all the DDR single data rate and also double data rate RAMs. So thank you very much. In the next class we are going to see how to upgrade the RAM specialty, how to expand the RAM in the computer. We will see in the next class. Thank you.